It has been 2 weeks since the release of The Mandalorian and Grogu, and we have box office returns to talk about. What does this mean for the future of Star Wars? We're going to talk about all of that this week on Exploring Hyperspace Lanes. Good morning and welcome, evening, I'm putting this up immediately, and welcome to Exploring Hyperspace Lanes. I am Adam. It has been 2 weekends now since we had the initial release of The Mandalorian and Grogu, and I think the thing that we kind of have to talk about with this is that the box office returns have been okay, but not great. And I think what we really need to address with this is, what does this mean for Lucasfilm, and how does Lucasfilm recover from this? So, originally when I recorded this, I was going to do it as a, Lucasfilm isn't doomed, and I don't think the initial box office return is not necessarily that bad, considering that it kind of made back its production budget in its opening weekend. And there's a lot of factors that go into this. Again, we'll talk about Hollywood accounting and how Hollywood accounting is intentionally hard to inscrutable, I guess would be the right word. That it's synonymous with, we're doing this in a way that is designed to make it hard for people to understand what's going on. We don't know what the actual break-even number is for this movie or what would make it considered a success, especially when taking into consideration the ancillaries and things like that go into a movie like Star Wars. So how do we quantify that? And I think that the prevalence of, to be honest, people like me on the internet who are going to attempt to, find out what the truth is from this is part of the wider problem. I don't know for certain how much it'll cost for the break-even. We know the reported production budget was $165 million. It made it back the opening weekend if you include the international territories, but in all, we don't know what it would take for this movie to be considered a success. Plus, we're not taking into consideration any value added by Disney Plus and, merch sales and all of that jazz. Fundamentally, this leaves us in a situation where we can only look at what it made in its second weekend. And in its second weekend, it made $25 million. It opened up against The Backrooms, or is it just Backrooms, or is it it's Backrooms is the name of the movie it opened against, which is a $10 million horror movie produced by a 20-year-old director who did this with money from A24. It grossed $80 million. Now, it grossed just under what The Mandalorian and Grogu did, which is the star power of Star Wars against The Backrooms, which is I believe it was a 4chan meme that became very popular on YouTube, and if you go on your discovery queue on Steam, you literally cannot avoid The Backrooms because it gets done to death in these things. And, it's analog horror, and it came out. $86 million is fantastic for a movie like that. And there's a conversation to be had about what this is going to mean going forward, and what's going to be the lessons learned from this by Hollywood and all of that. Maybe there's a 30-minute reviews in there. I don't know. But for right now, we have, that's what it did. This movie that is, a smaller concept with not the massive casting of Pedro Pascal. I love the woman from Cinema Value and The Worst Person in the World who works with Joaquin Trier quite a bit. I love her, but she's not putting asses in seats. Neither is... Who was the other person? Was it Chiwetel Ejiofor who was the other person in that movie from Doctor Strange? Again, another person, fantastic actor, not putting asses in seats. And I don't know that the director is necessarily doing that either. It's, the power of, I guess, internet memes. The point in all of this is, if that movie comes out and it does $20 million, and it's not $20 million, $2 million less. Not even, no, it was 86 and 86, but it was under $500,000 less in its opening weekend than a Star Wars movie. That is incredible for that, and it also is going to make you question what's going on with Star Wars, and whether the long-term plan that they have is worth it. And I think we have to talk about Dave Filoni in that. The other comparison I want to point out is that this movie had a 69%, very nice by the way, drop-off week 1 to week 2, which is pretty high. Industry standard is usually around 50, especially for something like this. In a weekend where it's like if you didn't see it the first weekend, now you have time now. And the question is what caused this precipitous of a drop-off? It dropped off and made less money in its second weekend than Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And when that happened, we looked at it as, oh, this franchise is dead. This is not something that is viable for Lucasfilm anymore. And this started higher and dropped out lower than Dial of Destiny did. So all of that said, let's look at what Dave Filoni should do next, and we'll do that right after this.
If you want reviews like this every week, follow Beware of Spoilers on Spotify and check out everything we cover at mwpnews.com.
So I think that it's something that's worth addressing in this wide world of Star Wars. That this is something that I thought that I'm going to say apropos of nothing else, and we'll get into it why it's relevant in a little bit. But in The Mandalorian and Grogu, the third act of the movie kind of happens partially because Dave Filoni himself is there. Like, say what you will about Kathleen Kennedy, but she was never literally on screen as a, like, pseudo half Deus Ex Machina to save the day at any point. Like, Kathleen Kennedy didn't come out in the third act of The Rise of Skywalker to save Rey. Although, would that have necessarily been worse than what we got? That's debatable. But the point is, it's like Dave Filoni is in this movie, cowboy hat and all. And what this movie is, and I think fundamentally what we have to address with this movie is that Disney made an unforced error with having their first Star Wars movie back in theaters since the end of The Rise of Skywalker, the end of the Skywalker saga. So we're talking 7 years now. The first theatrical release is a continuation of a Disney Plus show. We've seen multiple times at Disney that this does not work for them. The Marvels bombed out. Like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, I think did leave a lot of people with a weird taste in their mouths because it didn't feel like a natural continuation of this TV show. And what ends up happening is you end up feeling like there's homework. And granted, like, this didn't happen with, like, Deadpool, but I think the other thing you have to take into consideration is, like, where was the audience on these things when it happened? And I think that, like, Loki was very well received, and that was something that, oh, cool, Loki, loved Loki, let's go on. The Marvels, we can't hold in the same conversation because Miss Marvel was well received, WandaVision was well received, but that movie still bombed out. But I think that has more to do with the bad faith conversation around how much backstory you had to consume to understand what was happening. Which, again, that's an entirely different conversation about the chuds on the internet. The issue with this, this movie, the big problem was, like, The Mandalorian was very well received in Season 1. The Mandalorian Season 2 was okay received, but that was the beginning of the Glup Shido conversation. Then Book of Boba Fett happens, and that was not well received. Then came Mandalorian Season 3, which was far more mixed. And that's fundamentally the issue that we have here. This question of, like, who is excited for this? And I think the other issue is that we have the unforced error, again, of, like, the post-Endgame MCU is you're dealing with something that felt like it had closure. When I watched The Mandalorian Season 3, I was like, alright, this is likely the end for these characters. I will probably never see Mando and Grogu ever again. And I'm fine with that. Like, the way this sent off for these two characters riding off kind of into the sunset works well enough. And I think the issue that we kind of have with this is that it didn't feel like I needed to have more of it. At no point watching this did I feel like I needed, like, oh, well, this story feels incomplete and I need to see it. And then the other big issue that kind of happens with this is that it never really feels like you need a, what's it called? It never really feels like you need a continuation, and you need to see this in theaters. There was nothing about this show or this movie rather, that felt like I needed to go out and see it in IMAX. And here's kind of the issue that I do have with this whole thing now. Looking at this is that, Filoni is in an interview saying, like, everything is proceeding exactly as I've foreseen, quoting the Emperor, who famously, everything did go according to plan for the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. But also, it's like, is it going according to plan? Is this where we expected to see these things kind of happening? I think that's kind of my big issue here. Where it's like, I don't feel that we've really crossed the proper Rubicon on this. I don't feel that we've gotten to a point where Lucasfilm is in a good position. If this was going to be the first movie out after this, and this is what we're going to see going forward, I don't know that I can be excited for more Star Wars. In an honest way. Like, I can be excited for, like, let's see what Charmin Obey-Chinoy is doing. Let's see what James Mangold is doing. Let's see, what Sean Levy is doing, and let's see where these things end up. But I don't understand why I should get excited for these things that ultimately, like, they're interquels that are going to amount to very little. Okay, well, Thrawn got, now what? Like, I don't know. The whole thing just feels very strange to me. And unless, like, we end up with an Andor of, like, what happened between, 6 and 7, then I don't know that we can get to a point where this is interesting again. The big issue that I end up with watching, what's going on here is that I don't have any reason to be invested in the longevity of this franchise. Like, there isn't something coming down the line where I'm like, okay, well, at least this is coming and that's going to make things better. And the fact that this is the movie that's like, we have to do this first, tells me that they don't really know what to do with this. And it's like, look, I'm not saying you need to make every movie have world-ending stakes or universe-ending stakes or whatever. It's just like, this movie felt like a 2-hour-long episode of the show. And there's very little here that wouldn't have worked on Disney Plus on an identical budget. It's just kind of a little disappointing that this is what it was. And when the movie doesn't do well theatrically, what's the next step? Where does Star Wars go from here? And with a release slate as barren as it is, it seems there's not too much happening. Everything is going exactly as I have foreseen, is what you say when you don't want people to know that things are not going exactly as you've foreseen. Like, it's very much trust the process when there's nothing that has been done to make me trust the process going forward. And I think let's see what happens at D23 this year, at Comic-Con. Let's see if Lucasfilm shows up with something to try and, right the ship. But I don't know how you can look at this situation positively coming out of these two movies. But we will wrap up there for today. Our next episode will be next week when something else happens. And until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.
Before you go, I also write fiction. My newest novel, Succession Planning, is out on August 28th, available both in paperback and an ebook. It follows a journalism grad stuck managing a store while the owners wage a quiet war over who takes over the business. It's about ambition, inertia, and taking the easiest choice. The link is in the description. That's Succession Planning, out on August 28th.